What is up, everybody? Welcome to another Saturday morning edition of the College Football Show here on Roto Grinders. Happy to be with you, breaking down a large main slate of college football action today. Some pretty good games today. I think there's only one ranked versus ranked matchup. That's Missouri versus Texas A&M, but still a pretty good slate as most conferences roll into the heart of conference play right around this time of year. And DraftKings has given us 14 games today instead of the usual 12. So a little bit more to choose from today. Got the usual two co-hosts back with you here this morning. Of course, I am Justin Van Zuiden, STL Cardinals 84, with John Laub, the Gridiron Scholar, alongside. And I believe we were both out last week. So John, how you been?
I've been great. Yeah, unfortunately, it's the 1:12 o'clock kickoff. So I did see UConn. But I'm glad to be back. It's exciting. Good to see you, Justin. And we do have a nice slate. Just because they're not ranked teams, I think we have some very good matchups today.
Yeah, pretty good matchups. I think this is an interesting slate to break down. We do have a couple of injury concerns. The one that just came across this morning is Parrish, the running back for Ole Miss. He's a game-time decision for them today against South Carolina. Singleton for Penn State was listed as questionable, but he is expected to play. Another big one that we are kind of waiting on a decision is Connor Weigman for Texas A&M. He is dressed and available, though not necessarily sure if he's going to start for Texas A&M. I kind of hope that he doesn't from a fantasy perspective, but that's another situation that we will need to monitor. And those are kind of the big ones that I wrote down this morning as far as spots where we might not be sure who is in and who is out. We've had a few players in some various programs that have decided, hey, I played 4 games and now I'm going to abuse the NIL rules, for lack of a better term, and I'm going to redshirt and I'm going to go somewhere else. So Ches Malusi for Wisconsin is going to transfer. He's kind of the only household name on this slate that I had noted under those transfer rules. So he's going to redshirt. But anything else that you're keeping an eye on today from a news perspective?
Well, to me, the biggest one so far was Trey Harris, Mississippi. He was listed as questionable. I think it was on Wednesday, but he seems to be off the report. So that's good news. Trey Harris is arguably top 2 or 3 wide receiver in all of college football. So he looks healthy. And it looks like Nicholas Singleton of Penn State. He popped up on the injury report, but he looks like he's going to play today, which it only muddies the situation because we know they use that 2-back rotation. I was kind of hoping that maybe we just had Patron Allen in the backfield. That would have been more interesting. But if they're splitting carries, it definitely limits the ceiling.
Yeah, and Penn State is one of those that likes to kind of split things down the middle. Maybe they would have done it a little bit differently if Singleton would have been out, but sounds like we're going to get their usual rotation today, and they are, I believe, 29-point home favorites today. So maybe there's enough to go around for everybody. Maybe they limit Singleton a little bit more if he's a little bit banged up, but definitely a situation that's a little bit unclear as far as who stands to get the most carries in that backfield today. Otherwise, if there's other stuff that comes up, we'll pass it along during the show. Of course, if you want to ask questions live on air, we can take those. We prefer to answer those in our Roto Grinders Discord. So you do not have to be a paid premium subscriber in order to get access to that, though we would love to have you. You can check us out at rotogrinders.com/Discord. Again, you can just get in with a free Roto Grinders account. And then the live stream chat, there's a channel dedicated to that, and we can take questions live on the air if anybody has those early on a Saturday morning. All right, let's go ahead and start digging into this slate. I mentioned 14 games, so a few more options than what we normally have. Some pretty good top-end quarterbacks today, led by Jalen Milroe at the top of the pricing scale. He is 10.4K on DraftKings with a road matchup against Vanderbilt. Of course, Milroe put up huge numbers last week with Alabama chasing that game from behind against Georgia, or with Alabama scoring a bunch of points and then ending up having to come back against Georgia. Was just an incredible game. But Milroe at what's that?
It was unbelievable. It was so much fun.
Yeah, I mean, it was the first time that Alabama had scored or had been an underdog at home in like 12 years. It was only like a point or two underdogs. They get out to this big lead, 21 to nothing, I think, still in the first quarter. Georgia looks dead in the water, comes all the way back, takes a late lead. And then Alabama gets like the 75-yard touchdown on the first play of their next drive. Just ended up becoming incredible drama. And with that game ending up becoming closer than it you would have thought it would have been in the first half, Milroe ended up putting huge numbers on the board, both passing and rushing. He's rushed for 2 touchdowns in every game so far this year. Just with the new coaching staff, they're utilizing his dual threat ability a lot more. So Milroe is your top quarterback on the slate today at 10.4K. Jackson Dart at 9,900. And as John just mentioned a moment ago, likely to have his top receiver there today. Eli Holstein at 9K has been a popular option so far this year. If you're looking to spend up for a top end quarterback today, who do you like the best?
In cash games, it's definitely Milroe, Justin. We've been here before when you get these uber dual threat quarterbacks. And I think I had Milroe ranked number 5 CFF quarterback preseason. And now I think I was too low, right? Should have had him in the top 3. We've had it with Marcus Mariota. I've been playing long enough. Remember him at Oregon? I used to have him on all those night DFS slates. Then we've had people, players like Jalen Hurts when he was at Oklahoma. You just get these uber dual threat quarterbacks. 10-4, I honestly thought he was going to be over 11K.
Yeah.
When I saw 10-4, I know this might sound absurd. I think it was a little bit of a savings there. I have no problem paying 10-4 for Milroe. The upside is just so high. You mentioned the rushing. You got to assume he's up for 1 rushing touchdown minimum. I don't know if we'll get 2 again, but then he's going to throw the ball all over. I love him in this matchup against Vanderbilt.
And, everyone worries about blowouts against Vandy, but Vandy's been a more competitive team, certainly this year. Obviously, they had that big season opening game against Virginia Tech, and they've kept games generally more competitive. So I think Vandy can score enough to keep it. I certainly don't expect them to keep it within a score or 2, but enough to keep the starters around for most of the game. And with that dual threat ability, we've got Milroe projected comfortably ahead of the pack in terms of gross fantasy points today. So he's my top guy as well. Probably the only guy I have much exposure to above 9K there on DraftKings. And then from there, it's dipping down into the mid-range. Of course, Carson Beck ended up throwing the ball a ton last week with them in chase mode. Kyron Drones, Virginia Tech almost had that big win over Miami a couple weeks back. Garrett Green at the bottom of the 8K range. We do have a couple games with totals in the 60s today. Pitt and UNC and West Virginia, Oklahoma State are both sitting at about 64 for point totals today, which is a pretty high number. So any quarterback you like, if you're starting to dip down into the lower range, maybe either in lineups where you're skipping Milroe or if you're going for another kind of reasonably priced quarterback for a super flex.
If I want to bypass Milroe, and you could make that argument in GPPs, it's still a decent argument to make. I love Garrett Green. I'm going to talk about him a little bit more later, but at 8K, if there's anyone on this slate with the dual threat ability to hit that 35-point threshold, it is Garrett Green, and I love the environment at Oklahoma State. So I really like him for 8K if you want to differentiate in GPPs.
Yeah, the dual threat ability is there. That game should be a shootout. I think he's definitely a guy you need to target. And what I like to say is, tell yourself a story of how you think these games are going to go. If you think maybe Oklahoma State plays with a lead in this game, you can run some Ollie Gordon, and then you can run it back with Green. Obviously, those two guys are pretty expensive, but certainly a good environment if Oklahoma State were to play with the lead for that to work from a game flow perspective. You could flip it. If you think that West Virginia plays with the lead, you can go with some guys from the Oklahoma State passing attack, which would be Alan Bowman is priced right below Garrett Green there at 7.6K. He's going to get some ownership today as well. And then from there, it's probably just down into the value ranges. But what else you like at quarterback? I'll kind of open it up down here towards the bottom now as well.
Well, I think if you're going to go Jalen Milroe, we have lots of really nice salary saving options. First one that you mentioned, that it is going to depend on does he start, but Marcel Reed, the quarterback at Texas A&M, he's been really good, and he's a redshirt freshman. And here's what makes him. We know we're looking for that upside of dual threat running backs. He's had 43, 83, 91, and last week he only had 13 rushing yards, but he did score a touchdown. Marcel Reed is very interesting at 6.2. He also allows you to kind of still have enough money for some of those big receivers and running backs if you're going to go with Jalen Milroe. So I like Marcel Reed. And then I believe you did mention the other one, C.J. Bailey, the North Carolina State quarterback. He's a freshman, but he's 5.1. Justin, isn't that about I guess we go 4.7. So he's only 0.4K above the very bottom Hudson Card. But I like this environment of North Carolina State at home against Wake Forest. Wake Forest has not been very good defensively. I know you look at the raw numbers of C.J. Bailey and you might not think he's been great, but I do believe there's improvement. And at home in this environment, Bailey is a really nice option if you want to punt the quarterback position. Maybe he doesn't have the ceiling, but he's got a really nice floor. So Bailey and Reed are the two that I love at the bottom.
Yeah, Bailey, I think, is certainly the safer play, and Reed, again, we need to get confirmation. Hopefully we'll get that. Texas A&M is sometimes a little bit shaky about providing that info, but especially because Weigman's going to be available. It's not like he's going to be in street clothes, so we might not know. It is a noon kick, so fingers crossed. But as of right now, I'm not counting on Reed, but I would be happy to play him. I mean, if you look at what you mentioned, he's a redshirt freshman dual threat guy. If you look at what these dual threat guys can do, I mean, if you watched any of the games last night, Houston hadn't scored a point in 2 weeks. They got shut out back-to-back weeks. I mean, Houston looked like one of the most inept college offenses you've ever seen. They scored 7 against UNLV. They scored 12 against Oklahoma. They didn't score against Cincinnati. They didn't score against Iowa State. So they're coming off of 8 scoreless quarters, and they threw Zion Chris back at quarterback last night at TCU on the road, and they had a 17-0 lead in the first half and ended up holding on for a surprising win. And he had a 71-yard touchdown run, got a little banged up at the end of the game, but Donovan Smith came in and they were able to hold it off. But just that different element that, that Chris provided, I think was a spark to their offense. And I just don't think Connor Weigman is the guy. And, Texas A&M in a big game at home, I think you throw the guy out there that can do more damage with his legs.
I completely agree. And I think the future of the program is Reed at the quarterback position. So isn't there value, Justice? They're not going to win the SEC this year, right? The Aggies aren't that good. So wouldn't you like to get this young man ready for the 2025 season? He needs reps right now.
Yeah, for sure. And hopefully he gets those today, and we'll see. So if that news breaks, we'll obviously pass it along. But I am not planning on, one guy starting over the other without confirmation. But it would surprise me if, it wouldn't surprise me if they did anything, frankly, or even if they rotated or went with the hot hand. So, all right, let's go ahead and move to the running back position now, and a position that is actually loaded with options at the top. I remember there was a few weeks earlier in the year where maybe we only had one guy at the top on a given week. We've got quite a few guys today. Ollie Gordon in previous years was kind of always in a class by himself as a top option. He really hasn't gotten it going. The last 3 weeks has pretty much struggled. But great environment for a potential bounce back today. And then Hampton for North Carolina. Again, I mentioned both of those games have totals of 64 points. Caleb Johnson has been great for Iowa as well, but tough matchup for him today at Ohio State. You can probably cross him off. But then you've got Desmond Reed on the other side of that UNC Pitt game as well. So 3 running backs with teams projected to score over 30 points: Reed, Hampton, Gordon. How are you handling that top tier group?
So I'm going to start a little different today, Justin. I've come to the conclusion that Caleb Johnson is a GPP monster. We have really, really exceedingly low projection on ownership on Caleb Johnson. Now, I'll say this. Ohio State has not been tested up front. Their schedule, I'm just going to be kind, has been a cupcake. Iowa's offensive line, if you look at the advanced stats metrics on like PFF, their offensive line is much better than last year. Here's Caleb Johnson's box scores on DK. 28, 37, 34, 43. Justin, we know for a fact Caleb Johnson is going to get 20 carries against the Buckeyes. He might even get 3 or 4 receptions in this game. You're giving me less than 2% ownership, and we know that Iowa's going to run the football. I think, to me, I built a GPP lineup around Caleb Johnson just because the ceiling is there against the Buckeyes. I don't like him in cash. I agree. I mean, I think that's what we both agree with, right? But to GPP, I think he's the ultimate build around if you're looking to contrarian, because he still might get 32 points in this game just on volume. So that's just my first thought. The other two, Gordon and Hampton. I've thought about a lot this all day, and I've watched these Gordon games. There's something, I don't know if he's hurt. Something's different about this Oklahoma State. I lean towards in cash Hampton. We do have much higher ownership on Hampton, but Hampton, his touchdown equity is so high. He's their pass catching back. North Carolina, I love this spot against Pittsburgh because I think Pittsburgh can push them. I guess they're both in really good spots, right? They're both home. They both can be pushed by the opponent. I prefer Hampton over Gordon, but if you do want to differentiate, I understand why someone might go Gordon. I have Hampton in 2 of my 3 lineups.
Yeah, in cash games, I think you play Hampton. In GPPs, I do have a little bit more exposure relatively to Gordon just because of the difference in ownership. We've got them around the same fantasy point projection with Gordon at about half of the ownership. Your point's certainly valid. Maybe he's a little bit banged up. But I'll take some shots in GPPs today for his ceiling, especially in lineups where I've got some Garrett Green on the other side as well. And then the next, outside of that, in terms of top end running backs, pretty much a dead zone after that until we get down to about 6K, with the exception of maybe a couple guys. Bayshell Tootin for Virginia Tech, good matchup with Stanford today. Parrish pending his health, what Ole Miss is going to do at running back, and then Trevor Etienne, we're showing some pretty good projection on as well today. Anything else in the mid range before we get down to like 6K?
Well, I do like Bayshell Tootin. I think he's been so much better. I liked him. He was a really nice value in season-long drafts. I have a lot of them on my best ball leagues, but he has even exceeded any expectation. I didn't think he'd be this good because you did have Tyrone Drones, right? So I was a little bit, I was higher on Drones than Tootin. But man, look at these box scores of Tootin. 27, 33, 27, 25, 23. He is the offense. 4 straight games of over 100 yards rushing. He's their pass catching back. He had 4 receptions last week. He has other games with 4 and 6. I love Tootin. I'm not that afraid. Stanford, if you look at some of the advanced metrics, they're not as good as they appear against the run. And because you have drones, I think Tootin is a really good spot here on the road against Stanford. And there is a little bit of salary savings at 7.6. That's not too bad. Stanford can be beat on the ground. I'm really interested in this game, by the way. I think Stanford, Virginia Tech's a good, underrated game.
Yeah, I think there could be some spots here. We didn't mention Drones much at quarterback, but I think he's definitely viable too. If you're looking for more of a tournament play today. See Don Yeezy in our YouTube chat says it's ETN season, so I certainly don't mind him today as well. Georgia 3 touchdown home favorite against Auburn, but I think most of the ownership kind of in this range is going to flow to people going a little bit cheaper. So a few of the options that I want to highlight. Nate Noel for Missouri rushed for almost 200 yards last week. He seems to be their clear RB1 at this point. Tawi Walker at 5,100 for Wisconsin. Again, mentioned Ches Malusi is going to redshirt and likely transfer. So that opens up the door for Walker to get a good majority of the carries there. So those two guys are kind of in that 5-6K range. What else are you looking at as far as running back options are concerned?
Well, I love your two selections. Walker is in such a nice spot now with Malusi transferring. He definitely looks good for 20 carries. Purdue is not good on defense, right, Justin? If you've seen Purdue this year, they're not very good on either side of the ball. Wisconsin, I believe they're coming off a loss, right? So let me check. Yeah,
they lost to
USC.
USC.
Yeah, so they're going to come out, and we know they're going to run the ball against Purdue here. So I really like Walker there. And then if you look, so let me scroll down. I agree with you with Nate Noel. I think that's an interesting one. I know this might be a little goofy. I love this environment for West Virginia. And I like Garrett Green. But he's got decent ownership. The player who I'm interested in, who I put in one GPP, is Jaheim White. And I know you might think it sounds a little bit nuts, but Jaheim White's the explosive pass-catching back for the Mountaineers. Very low ownership. I have this feeling that he's going to get into space against the Cowboys. And if you want to differentiate in that game, Jaheim White is due. Last year we saw those explosive plays, right, Justin? He had touchdowns over 40 yards away in the running game and in the receiving game. Jaheim White has not done that yet. And I feel like this is a really interesting spot for Jaheim White. If you're looking to differentiate, I would not use him in cash because he's too up and down. I think he's gotten double-digit points in most of the games this year. But I do have a lineup in GPP, which I put White in. And Justin said it perfectly. How do you envision a game script going, right? What if Ollie Gordon gets out? What if they jump out 17-0 Oklahoma State at home? Then what do you have? You have a wide open passing game by West Virginia, and that would include Garrett Green and Jaheim White, and it might take C.J. Donaldson off the field a little bit more. So I'm very interested as in GP only. Don't get me wrong, anyone. He's a GPP only play.
Yeah, don't mind that call. We've got him at 2% projected ownership. He's 5.3K, so not overly expensive.
That's the thing I like too.
Yeah, would certainly work, particularly if you're interested in building some game stacks or something like that as well. There's a few different ways you can handle that if you're building some GPP lineups today. If you're looking to go super cheap, I know you mentioned you like that Stanford Virginia Tech game, so maybe some interest in Micah Ford. Isaac Brown for Louisville has gotten quite a bit of buzz this week. They've got some really cheap pieces. Tyler Shuck at quarterback isn't all that expensive. Isaac Brown at running back is 4,300. They've basically got a free square at wide receiver today that we'll talk about in a little bit. So Brown, Ford, anybody else we've missed at running back if you're going super cheap?
I do like Micah Ford. They were on. Stanford has been on the last 2 weeks. I saw him against Syracuse, and I saw him last week against Clemson. Now, they got beat up a little bit by Clemson, that defense. But Micah Ford is a true freshman, everyone. He had 13 carries for 122 yards. No one else has stood out in that Stanford backfield. I do like this spot against Virginia Tech at home. If you're looking to save a little bit of salary savings, Micah Ford he scored 16.4 points, and at 4.1, I think he's in an interesting spot. Not necessarily unless you're just saving. Like if you went Hampton, Milrow, and a high-priced wide receiver, maybe you're looking for a running back. I like Ford there, and I'll talk about my other guy I like when we do the Fantastic Four.
All right. That's probably good for the running back position. We'll go ahead and move to wide receivers. We'll touch on FanDuel for a little bit before we get out of here and take any questions you might have. I do see that Golf Nut has dropped one in our Discord chat. Again, rotogrinders.com/Discord. Don't have to be a paying subscriber to get in there. And we are in the live stream chat channel. If you are interested in being a premium subscriber, you can check out, we've got a new offering, Combo Light at Roto Grinders, which is our newest product. It gives you the power of simulation for a fraction of the price of our other tools. Competitors charge hundreds a month for their sim products. Combo Light is just $39.99 a month, and it includes our SimLabs lineup building tool, plus content from some of your favorite DFS analysts. Combo Light does not limit you to one sport either. It includes SimLabs access to the four most popular sports, MLB, NFL, NBA, and PGA. So you won't find a more cost-effective option anywhere. If you're interested in some of those other sports in addition to college football, check us out, Combo Light, over at rotogrinders.com. All right, let's go ahead and move into wide receiver here. Top end of wide receiver today, I don't think people are going to like as much as the top end at running back. Trey Harris certainly projects really well, assuming he's healthy. He's 8,900. Malachi Fields, Luther Burden, Jeremiah Smith, Brennan Presley, Ryan Williams, who had that huge game last week for Alabama, priced all the way up to 7,300. So those are your top end options today. Are you feeling like we need to spend up for somebody? And if so, who you got?
In two of my three cash game lineups, I put in Trey Harris. I don't think you can take the risk that he breaks the slate and his floor is so high. And you had mentioned in the opening, Justin, that Parrish prop, it looks like he might not play today. And that significantly hurts the Mississippi running game. And what you have is they're coming off a loss here. And I think South Carolina, they tend to be pretty good at home. Beamer's team is tough, right? They're a tough knockout. You just don't go. I don't think you just punch South Carolina in the face. So I think you have a Mississippi team here that needs to play really hard, and they might be without their top running back. So what do? You rely on your quarterback, Jackson Dart, and you get opportunities for Trey Harris. I have him in 2 of 3 cash games. He's under 9K, so I was happy with that. And there's some salary savings we can talk about later. So you can get Trey Harris in those lineups. You know, what is his floor, Justin? 25 points? I feel like that's a pretty decent floor with Trey Harris. Maybe 20 if it's a terrible, I don't expect that, with the 35-point to 40-point ceiling. So I love Trey Harris in this matchup, but not in GPP. I think I might go somewhere else in GPP, my friend.
Yeah, I mean, I don't have a lot of lineups where I'm spending top dollar on wide receiver today. I just prefer to spend up at quarterback, prefer to spend up at running back for some of those higher end options. And I find myself going a little bit cheaper with the wide receivers. Certainly Harris, assuming he's a full go. Presley for Oklahoma State. You know, if you're stacking up that game, he'd probably be the guy I'm most interested in at wide receiver. But I am going cheaper with most of my wide receiver selections today, and probably starting with an option in the 6Ks. We mentioned NC State, their quarterback is pretty cheap. Concepcion is a guy I like a lot. He's only 6,700 there against a porous Wake Forest defense. So Concepcion at 6,700, I like. Mumpfield at 6,200, I think, is an interesting GPP pairing with Holstein. If you want some exposure to Pitt with a high total today, who are you liking kind of in the mid-range of receivers?
I really like that Oklahoma State game also. And if you don't want Presley, I do like Stripling, Deshaun Stripling. Now, unfortunately, he's kind of up and down. I think he's got 2 games over 30 and 2 games under 10 in the last 4 weeks. So there is some risk there, but I do like Deshaun Stripling of Oklahoma State.
Yeah, I think he's a fine GPP option in that middle tier. I've got a little bit more exposure to Concepcion and some Mumpfield, but Stribling, I think, is fine also. And then that kind of takes us into the 5K range of wide receivers. And I think, you know, even the 4Ks is where most people are going to go today. Right at 5K, you've got Bernard for Alabama, who I think is going to be a popular option today. And ownership is probably going to be spread around to some degree. So, there's a whole lot of options in the 4Ks and even the 3Ks as well. I can highlight some of my favorites, but as we go down the wide receiver board, who are you liking as more value options today?
Well, I think it's an interesting conversation. If you have Milrow, do you have to play a wide receiver? And I don't think you have to because of the dual threat. Then we saw the freshman, Ryan Williams, has just gone nuts, right? Oh, I got so much value early in the season on Ryan Williams, but I believe he's over 7K, right? 7.3. So the value on the freshman wide receiver is gone right now. So what does that open up? Jeremy Bernard, sorry. He had 17 and 14 points in the last 2 weeks, Justin. I've been thinking about this matchup in this game a lot. Alabama is obviously interested in winning the national championship. They have a good chance. I do believe that with Ryan Williams, you need someone else in this passing game to take some pressure off the young kid, even though he's unbelievable, right? I mean, there's no question how good he is. And eventually, don't defensives have to start putting more defensive assets against Ryan Williams to try to stop him? I like Bernard in this game at 5K. You would mention if you don't go big at wide receiver and you like Milrow, I do like Bernard because I do think a big game is coming, Justin. We're going to see, I think, over 100 yards receiving and a touchdown eventually from Bernard. It's just a matter when. We still have a good price on him. So I like Bernard a ton at this level. And then if you go down, I think let's just get the free square out of the way, right?
Yeah.
Colin Lacey. Hey, we played this game long enough, Justin. If DraftKings gives you a free square, just play 7-on-7. There still will be 20% of people who don't have Colin Lacey. I'm okay with that, right? But Colin Lacey of Louisville, if everyone doesn't know, Colin Lacey plays at Louisville. They're in a good environment against SMU. I think they're going to throw the ball a lot. His ceiling might be capped because they have 3 good wide receivers. But, man, his floor is very high. He scored 12.2 points last week. He's at 3,400. I think you just take Colin Lacey, and that helps you get Milrow and Hampton in the lineups, everyone.
Yeah, absolutely. He's just too cheap. This is a guy that caught 100 balls last year and had like 7 straight 100-yard games at South Alabama. Obviously, transferring to Louisville, you're dealing with tougher competition than what you saw at South Alabama. But, it's a guy that caught 100 balls and is going to be their number one wide receiver. He just came back last week against Notre Dame and had, for 30 under 4K, even the 5 catches for 71 yards or whatever he finished with last week gets the job done. And I would venture that his production today is better in a more favorable matchup than what we saw last week. So Lacey is certainly the free square. Anybody else you like as far as more value options go? And then I'll fill in with some of mine and we'll move over to FanDuel.
I have 2 that I like, and I put in 2 of my 3 lineups. I do like Will Pauling of Wisconsin. I know he burned a lot of us last week. I mean, I was so frustrated, man. What did he have? 2 catches in that game against USC where, the game script was good. They had him play. They were throwing the football, and Pauling did nothing. I like that USC. I had a lot of Miller Moss. That was a good lineup build with Miller Moss last week. And then I like Lewis Bond. He had I was surprised that the ownership is so high on him because I identified him earlier in the week. Boston College is traveling to Virginia. Virginia doesn't have a great defense, everyone. They're getting their quarterback, Thomas Castellanos, back. Castellanos is a dual threat quarterback, but he is a better thrower of the football. And I do think that Bond is in a real nice spot here. In 2 of the 3 games before they lost Castellanos, he had scored 21 and 25 PK points. So a 4.5K. I also like Lewis Bond and Will Pauling.
And you teed up the question earlier that Golf Nut had asked in the Discord chat. Would you consider Castellanos in any GPP builds today?
Absolutely. I mean, with that rushing upside, Justin, right? If you really want to differentiate, I think it's a good environment for Boston College. And again, you don't have to play Bond with Castellanos, but you could, because again,
Right.
we're trying to differentiate in a GPP. And how much is Castellanos? I should look, right? I think he's a good price. Am I correct on that?
Yeah, he's not overly expensive.
8.4. But I think you can do it. I do like his ceiling if he got 2 or 3 rushing touchdowns.
All right, a couple guys that I want to make sure we highlight before we move on to John's Fantastic Four and talk about FanDuel. But if you've been watching Penn State, so they've got a tight end by the name of Tyler Warren that leads the team in targets so far this year, but they've also been using him as a goal line running back, which muddies the waters even more with how you want to handle the Penn State running back situation.
With Singleton on my teams, it killed me, Justin, on my season long.
But Warren, I think, they're going to score today. They're going to get down by the goal line. Maybe he vultures another goal line touchdown with the running attack, but also leads the team in targets this year. So he's certainly viable, I think, at as a tight end, wide receiver position, obviously on DraftKings. But and then the other guy that I kind of plucked out of thin air, that's kind of my GPP difference maker today. If you hearken back to like the first week of the season, Jamal Banks was like the most expensive wide receiver on the slate for some reason. That was kind of a mistake at the time. But now Jamal Banks is 3.8K on DraftKings. And I know it's Nebraska and Rutgers, and the game only has like a 40-point total, but Jamal Banks is better than a $3,800 wide receiver. And so for better or worse, I am going to chuck some GPP exposure at Jamal Banks today as a pivot away from, in a few builds you could use as maybe a pivot away from Lacey in GPPs if you want to. So those are my rest of my wide receiver plays.
He was 7,500. I just
looked
it up.
It was crazy.
And now he's 3,800. And he was really good last year I should say good for Wake Forest. So it's really bizarre that he's just gone down that much.
And more people probably played him at 7,500 the first week than are going to play him today at 3,800, just because of recency bias and all that stuff. So it's not a must play by any means, but a good GPP pivot away from Lacey if you're looking for something frisky today. So, all right, let's go ahead and recap our DraftKings takes here before we move on over to FanDuel. Usually throw it over to John for his Fantastic Four plays on DK here before we wrap it up. So, John, what do you got for your Fantastic Four today?
All right, you can go to the Rotor Grinders Optimizer. It's awesome, everyone. You can put the Fantastic Four in the Optimizer. You can get up to 20 builds. You can do GPP and cash game lineup builds. It's awesome. I use it all the time. At quarterback, I love Garrett Green. Twice in the last 3 games, he scored over 30 points. He had 32 against Kansas and against, I think it's Alabama, Birmingham, 34 points. He has that uber dual threat upside. Love the environment, like the game script. He's a very talented college quarterback. So putting Garrett Green into our optimizer. At running back, I'm going to give you 2 who I like. One high price and one who's a value play. I do like Amari and Hampton. Put him into your cash game lineup. I think he's rock solid with the floor of 25 with the upside of 35 to 40. I like him for cash games. And I do want to say, whenever I do Fantastic Four, I like to find a player who's going to save you salary. We've already given you Colin Lacey, and I thought that was a little bit too easy. So what I did this week is I really like Louisville running back, Isaac Brown, everyone. I know it's a little bit risky, but he's 4.3. And last week I was impressed. The freshman had against Notre Dame, and I did not expect them to run the ball well against Notre Dame at all. He had 13 carries for 72 yards, but more importantly, Justin, in my book, He had 4 receptions for 23 yards and a touchdown. If you're looking to save, I like Isaac Brown with Marion Hampton. That's a very nice, solid floor. And at wide receiver this week, I mentioned it before, I love Deshaun Stribling at Oklahoma State. He plays the outside receiver, the boundary receiver. Yes, Prezi is the PPR monster, the slot guy, but the Stribling plays on the outside. I think there's going to be some opportunities in play action passing for Stribling to get open deep one-on-one. And even Bowman, even though I don't love him, he's good enough to get Stribling the ball. I think this is an upside. I like Stribling this week. So that's my Fantastic Four. Garrett Green, Marion Hampton, Isaac Brown, and Deshaun Stribling. Plug them into our optimizer, everyone.
Awesome. Like those calls today. I think this is a really interesting slate as far as DraftKings goes. So should be a fun one to keep an eye on today. And those 4 plays definitely have a good chance to keep you competitive on this slate today. So, all right, before we get out of here, let's go ahead and pivot over to FanDuel. As we know, FanDuel tends to include some of the better night games on their slates. I know we've had some people in the YouTube chat asking about the options in the night games as well. So those games that FanDuel has added, Clemson and Florida State, that's not necessarily a great fantasy game. Just a 46.5 total in that game. Tennessee and Arkansas should be a good one. That totals at 57. Baylor and Iowa State is at 44.5. Michigan and Washington is at 41.5. And then UCF and Florida is at 62. So we've got a few kind of dud games, 3 games with totals under 50. And then Tennessee, Arkansas, and UCF and Florida with higher totals. And I think those will be the headline games of the evening slate. And, you know, I don't know about you, but I think Arkansas with the talent that they have and a dual threat quarterback of their own, you know, they're at home. Maybe it's just me hoping for a good game tonight, but I think Arkansas can give, I'm not saying they're going to win, but I think Arkansas can give Tennessee a little test here.
Oh, I think it is if you want to build this line, right, you're building a lineup GPP. Taylon Green, if you go, we'll talk about Dylan Sampson later, right? I think if you want to have a comeback on the other side, if Tennessee gets out like a 10 or 14-point lead, that's going to force Arkansas, and Taylon Green is spectacular in the open field. And Tennessee's defense is good against the run. So I think Taylon Green, he's at 9K. And I know on FanDuel, he's pretty far down the list, right, Justin? He's if you're looking to differentiate, I think that's a real nice, and you can stack Taylon Green. We can talk about a wide receiver later. I think you hit on something because we have him at what? We have right now about 6% ownership. I think he's being ignored on this slate. I agree with you, Justin.
Yeah, he's 9K on FanDuel, which is like 3K cheaper than a lot of the higher end quarterbacks. So Iamaleava on the other side of that game, you know, certainly fine as well. That's the game as far as if you're looking for a game in the night slate to target options from. I do like that Tennessee Arkansas game. I mean, certainly UCF and Florida, you can play RJ Harvey and he's great, and he's also really expensive. But so let's just touch on the positions here quick on FanDuel before it's time to get out of here. But quarterbacks on FanDuel, obviously we just touched on Green on the night slate. Anything else stands out to you on FanDuel at QB?
Justin, I can't believe I'm saying this after 5 weeks. I'm a believer in Cade Klubnik. He's just played too good of football. I've seen 3 of the 4 games by Clemson. I'm shocked at how well he's playing. He seems to be making really good decisions with the football. Phil Mappa's been good, but he's not been spectacular, so it has forced them to put the ball in the air. And what I like about Cade Klubnik, people, he's got some sneaky rushing upside. Now, he is a little, 11.5, but he is 2K cheaper than Jalen Milroe. He does have a 30-point ceiling, folks, maybe 35. I mean, I think Klubnik, and we have him, I mean, less than 1% ownership right now. I think that's another sneaky quarterback to build a stack around in GPP.
Yeah, he's a little pricey on FanDuel, which I think is kind of what's keeping people a
Yes.
little bit nervous on him. But another guy that I think you could potentially consider is Kevin Jennings. I didn't
Oh,
mention him
yeah.
on DraftKings, but he seems to have that SMU job now. Another dual threat guy. I think Louisville's going to score some points today. So GPP only, but Kevin Jennings would be another name that I'll give a head nod to on this slate today.
I concur,
All right,
my
let's
friend.
move to running back. I just mentioned RJ Harvey. He's the most expensive running back on the entire FanDuel slate at 10.5. He's about 1,000 more expensive than Hampton and Gordon, so you do have to pay a premium for him. So I'm, fine with him, but probably sticking with the Hampton Gordon savings myself. Any other thoughts on FanDuel running back for you?
The only player I like as much as Hampton, now he is more expensive, but Dylan Sampson, man, I mean, when he hits, he's unbelievable. And even though Nico's been very good from a fantasy perspective, Nico Amalileva of Tennessee has not been as good as you think, right? They're winning. He's been playing very good football, but his fantasy season ceiling isn't there. I think it's Dylan Sampson. I thought we'd have higher ownership on Sampson. We're looking at around 15%, and Hampton's 44%. So I do like that type of pivot. This is a very good environment for Tennessee and Arkansas. And I mean, hey, I have a lineup. I love Sampson and Green in one of my GPP FanDuel lineups.
Yeah, and if you want to try to peg a wide receiver for Tennessee, you can ask the Magic 8 Ball if it knows which Tennessee wide receivers can get the ball the most tonight. But certainly a game that you can stack up a few pieces from, and I like that call with Green and Sampson, even if you're not going with a whole lot else from that game. I think that's a solid way to build some lineups on FanDuel today. All right, wide receivers. There's not a ton that I like in the later games that are additional options. I'm trying to stick to in the all-day slate on FanDuel, trying to stick with the guys that are playing in the afternoon games. I do think Armstrong for Arkansas, again, if we talked about adding up some pieces from that game, I think he's in play. Williams for Clemson, maybe if you're playing some Klubnik, but FanDuel wide receiver, what do you got?
So those two freshmen, Jeremiah Smith and Ryan Williams, we've mentioned. Well, we haven't mentioned Jeremiah Smith, but Ryan Williams we did. They're the second and third highest price. Think about the freshmen. I can't remember in my 12 or 14 years, two freshmen in week 6 being the second and third highest price. I don't have either one. I just think I got a little priced out on these two at this point on this slate, so I don't have them. But Luther Burden, we haven't talked about him.
Yeah.
But Luther Burden has that GPP winning ceiling. Not likely, but he has very low ownership of under 10%. We haven't seen the 35-point game out of him yet this year, but we did see it last year. Luther Burden does have that slate-breaking potential. So I think it's someone, if you really want to differentiate, I do like Luther Burden.
Yeah, I mean, we saw last year he was 30-40% owned a lot of times. So it's certainly a call that you can make in your GPP builds as well. So I hesitate to pass this along without confirmation because I'm not sure of the poster. Okay, it did come out a few minutes ago that Grayson McCall is expected to start today.
That's what I was just coming in to say.
I gotta go change some of
my big news. That's big news. I mean, if you instead of playing a cheap quarterback from NC State, now you're gonna have to play Hudson Card, and you don't want to do that.
I mean, is McCall playable at only $400 more?
Yes, for sure.
Yes.
Yeah. So that's huge news. Make sure that again, this has been tweeted out from seemingly reliable NC State sources. It's college football, right? I don't want to say this is 100% certain. We got to keep an eye on final warmups and stuff. But before we got off the air here, I just wanted to make sure I passed that along because I know that's going to be big news. So thank you for passing that along. Anybody who mentioned that in the chat. We did have another question in the YouTube that I had seen throughout the show that I wanted to mention because somebody asked, is it okay to play just one quarterback today with all the high-priced guys at running back that project pretty well?
I do think it's a viable. Now, when I put together my lineups, I did do that in 2, trying to work it out. I did not love the build because I think there is value, but Bailey now changes. So losing Bailey, and I'm not a huge McCall guy, but I think he is viable, as TJ said. But I'm going to have to, what do we got? About half an hour. I'll look at it again just to kind of look at it. It is viable. And if you want to differentiate, maybe you go, you know what? If you really want to get funky, maybe you go Gordon and Hampton, right? And go different at that. Maybe you do that. So I do think that is viable, but you have to go cheap at the wide receiver position.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think that's a bad idea today, and I am going cheap at wide receiver a lot myself today as well. So don't hate that call, but I tend to always be the one that's playing 2 quarterbacks. So it's tough for me to get away from that. All right, with that, I think we've gotten through everything. I'm going to have to adjust some of my lineups. Sounds like John is as well. So with that, we'll go ahead and call it a show for this morning. Thanks for tuning in, as always, on a Saturday, getting you ready for some college football. I'll be back next week. I think Jordan will be next week one last time. We've got our final weekend of kids sporting events around here. So I'll be out next week, but then after that should be back for the rest of the season. So I'll be John and Jordan with you next week. Thanks to TJ for producing behind the scenes for us this morning. Thanks to John, as always, for joining me as well. I'm Justin. Have a great weekend, everybody, and we'll catch you back here, same time, same place next week. See you later.